In our continuing love of persuasion theory, this time we're going to look at the theory of planned behavior. This theory is a bit different because it's an extension of the theory of reasoned action. Now, often you'll find that theories are further researched, developed, and oftentimes altered to address the specific constraints of those theories. So why talk about the theory of reasoned action? Why not just talk about this, the theory of planned behavior? The reason is that you want to use the simplest theory in order to meet your goals the best for your persuasion or your persuasive campaign. So where the theory of reasoned action can work, it should be used. Think of this as really the path of least resistance. So if the problem is about attitudes and subjective norms, then the theory of reasoned action should be used. But if it's a little bit more than that, if you're trying to cover one of those weakness areas that we discussed with the theory of reasoned action, then the theory of planned behavior may offer a better solution to it. So let's take a look at the theory of planned behavior. In the evolution of the theory, Aizen, who we talked about as one of the primary authors on the theory of reasoned action, was disquieted by some of the weaknesses and the limitations of the theory of reasoned action. You know, as a reminder, one of the weaknesses was that there isn't a one-to-one relationship between behavioral intention and actual behavior. And in fact, that there are circumstances and limitations that can get in the way of someone's intent to do some action and whether they actually can. Now, if you think about the example that we used, one of the challenges with promoting healthy eating lifestyles is that in urban environments, there's often a lack of ready availability towards good foods, good grocery stores even. And sometimes it's a lot easier and a lot less expensive to eat kind of yucky or unhealthy options. So this is one of those things that if you're trying to develop a persuasive campaign, you have to get around the availability issues. You have to figure out how to inconvenience people and make them be willing to make sacrifices in order to get food that's better for them. And this is what Aizen was trying to address. So let's take a look at the extension of the theory of reasoned action with planned behavior. Now, if you look at this, those top two factors, the attitude and the subjective norm, along with intention and behavior, are exactly what we talked about before. What Aizen added in was a third factor, our perceived behavioral control. Now, we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about perceived behavioral control, but he argued that our ability, or at least our perception of our ability to actually enact the behavior, is not only going to affect our intention, but also the actual act of doing the behavior altogether. So let's take a look at perceived behavioral control. Very simply, it is about our perception of our ability to perform an action. Notice perception is key here. This isn't about whether or not we could actually go to a grocery store, whether there was an easy and inexpensive bus route to go to a grocery store, but it's about our perceived inconvenience and our perceived ability to actually get there. Remember, we can tell ourselves a lot as human beings. Sometimes we lie to ourselves. So our perception is the critical component of this. Now, how Aizen came to this notion of perceived behavioral control was to borrow from another social psychologist, Albert Bandura, who was a founding author of Self-efficacy, but in this case, Aizen used the social cognitive theory to really develop this theory. So in addition to the attitudes and subjective norms, which make up the theory of reasoned action, the theory of planned behavior added the concept of perceived behavioral control, originating in self-efficacy theory, and self-efficacy theory was grounded from Bandura. He worked on both self-efficacy theory and social cognitive theory. We'll talk about efficacy in a minute. Don't worry, hang with me here. But social cognitive theory is a learning theory based on the ideas that people learn by watching what others do, and that the human thought processes are central to understanding personality. So while a social cognitive psychologist would agree that there's a fair amount of influence on the development generated by learned behaviors displayed in our environment where we actually grow up, they believe that the individual is just as important in determining their own development and what we learn. So the bottom line is that people learn by observing others. They learn in a particular environment, and those behaviors are all chief factors in influencing our development in any particular area. So these three factors, who we are as a person, our behaviors, and our environment, are not static or independent, but they all interact. They're all reciprocal to one another. So for example, anytime that we observe someone acting, any behavior we witness can actually change our thinking, those personal determinants. Similarly, the environment that we're raised in may influence much later behaviors. So just like, our father's mindset will also determine the environment in which he's raised, or he raises his kids. So if we're trying to, get our kids a better life, we may try to move to a different area, different school district, a different place in order to further their potential. But at the same time, it's our own decision-making process that helps guide us there. All of these things are related. So when we come to this notion of what we're trying to do, how we're trying to affect our environment, how our environment affects us, and how all of this combines to affect our behaviors, Bandura argued that this concept of self-efficacy was really the best way to understand how it is that we learn and how it is that we think we're able to perform actions. So let's take a look at a broad definition of efficacy. Efficacy at its most basic sense is our belief in our ability to perform a specific action, as well as making a prediction about what will happen when we perform that action. According to Bandura, our expectations, like our motivation, our performance, and even our feelings of frustration associated with repeated failures, determine how we view particular behaviors, as well as our reactions to those behaviors. So he separated efficacy into two distinctive types: self-efficacy and outcome efficacy. He defined self-efficacy as the conviction that we can successfully execute a behavior. My belief in my ability to do physics, for example. The outcome expectancy is when we estimate how important that behavior will be. So if we think about, if I learn how to do physics, is there good that's going to come from that? That's the outcome efficacy. So, if I learn how to play the piano, for instance, I may end up with a really high sense of self-efficacy that I can play the heck out of the piano. But if playing the piano doesn't get me anything, I might have a low sense of outcome expectancy. That even if I do my very best at playing the piano, I will never be playing in Carnegie Hall. Those are both perceptions and expectations, but they're very different forms. So we're going to spend some time talking about each of them. So first, let's take a look at what self-efficacy is and is not. First, self-efficacy is most definitely our belief in our ability to perform some action. I know it's a little cheesy. You should expect that by now. But the little engine who could, that's sort of the metaphor for self-efficacy. You think and you are very confident in your ability to execute a particular action. Now, efficacy is specific to specific actions and to specific contexts. So, whereas I may have a high level of efficacy when it comes to communication, researching communication, reading about it, doing communication, whether that's interpersonally, organizationally, in public relations, I have a pretty high level of efficacy in communication. That doesn't mean that I have a high level of efficacy when it comes to physics. So, it's not that this changes our global sense about our ability to do anything. It is specific to particular actions. Now, it even can be specific to particular contexts. I might be a very good researcher, but I may not be very good at applied communication. It's not just that we have these universal sets of actions that we're comfortable with, that we're confident in. It's all very interdependent. It's all very related to specific. So efficacy, the more specific we can be about it, the more clear it is. So, if we use an example of exercising, do I have confidence in my ability to get up every day, get up early enough every day, get on the treadmill, walk 30 minutes before, I go on about my day? That doesn't mean that I would expect to be able to go out and play soccer for 90 minutes. That's what I mean by specific actions and specific contexts. Now, a lot of times the notion of self-efficacy gets confused with a couple of other things. So, it is not the same as self-esteem. Self-esteem is really a more global sense of ourselves. Efficacy focuses on our ability to achieve specific goals. So, the kitten versus the lion. The picture is about self-esteem. We may have very high levels of self-efficacy in terms of specific actions, specific fields, but we may not like ourselves. The two are just not related. And that's an important thing to note, that self-efficacy has no relationship to self-esteem. Direct anyhow. Also, it's not the same as confidence. Confidence is sort of a pop culture term that we see tossed around on things like Dr. Phil. Confidence is supposed to be some kind of nebulous, I am confident that I can do X, Y, or Z. No. A lot of the times when we're talking about confidence, we're conflating how we view ourselves with specific actions. From an academic sense, view it in terms of self-efficacy and self-esteem. Don't refer to confidence as the concepts that we're measuring, because it gets very confusing as to what's what. It's kind of like chasing a jackalope. In theory, but in practice not so much. So, let's take a look at the effects of self-efficacy on human behavior. Why is this an important component of the theory of planned behavior? First, it really governs our choices regarding behaviors. The bottom line is that we like doing things that we feel like we're successful at. We don't like doing things that we're expecting to fail at. And think about that for a minute. This makes sense. So if I'm confident in my ability to do communication, why would I go try physics out? We like to feel good about the work that we're doing, and a lot of the time, whether we can do it well ends up being, whether we like it or not. Maybe a sport that we played when we were kids, maybe it wasn't our first choice, but it's the one that we were good at. Larry Walker, who's pretty much has a Hall of Fame career, played baseball for the Colorado Rockies. It wasn't the sport he loved the most. He's Canadian. So what's the sport he loved the most? Hockey. He wasn't as good at hockey. But what he chased in terms of the sport that he played was the one he was really good at. So self-efficacy affects our choices regarding behavior. Second, it also affects our motivation. If we're good at something, it's a whole lot more fun to go do. If we feel like we're banging our head against the wall every single day and just not getting better, it's a lot rougher to try and actually work up the motivation to do a particular behavior. I am not particularly gifted at bowling, and let me assure you, neither is my husband. It's not that I dislike the game, but it's awfully hard to be motivated to go play it when I know that my score is going to be somewhere around 100. Out of 300, that doesn't make me feel warm and fuzzy. So, motivation and our confidence in our ability to do something end up being pretty well tied together. Next, self-efficacy can be a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. When we really believe that we can do a behavior, we're probably going to be more successful at it. We put in the work. We really just focus on our ability to act. If, however, we don't have a high degree of self-efficacy, we are much more likely to be critical of ourselves. We're much more likely to look for examples of our failure, at our infinite suckage, if you will. So it is a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. We talk ourselves into sometimes being good and bad at things. Yeah, there is a basic reality that some of our natural abilities, I am never going to be, I don't know, what was it? A star beach volleyball player. One, I'm too short, and two, don't have a vertical jump to outweigh the being too short, and three, I'm just, I'm all right at it. I can live on some beach volleyball if I go and not embarrass myself, but there's a whole world of difference. So what if I were to try? I don't have the belief in my ability to do that enough to be willing to go try. Understand that sometimes the self-fulfilling prophecy is us being realistic with ourselves. On the negative side, we see in education, for example, a lot of the time that kids get very discouraged. Children who are from homes where the parents didn't have a high level of educational success are told from an early age, hey, I wasn't good in school, I don't expect you to be either. That actually has a substantial negative effect on their self-efficacy when it comes to studying, when it comes to, basically just learning. This is actually one of the biggest inhibitors for students from socioeconomically disadvantaged households. If you look at the results for urban poor and education, what we find is this notion of the self-fulfilling prophecy. The parents don't have confidence in their abilities to be educated, and they really pass that on through their communication, and they build really a culture of failure in school. An expectation that kids are not going to do well in school because they didn't, because of lack of resources, whatever it might be. Building efficacy is one of the big strategies that I see a lot of people doing when they're trying to change educational achievement in underdeveloped school districts that are struggling. It's a very powerful concept, this notion of self-efficacy. Another effect is mastery. Oh, sorry, those were all of our effects. But we want to take a look at the factors that affect self-efficacy. So how do we build self-efficacy? Now, what you're going to notice is that there isn't a lot of pop psychology fluff. Ooh, let's make everybody feel good and sing Kumbaya around the campfire. This is actually effective. A friend of mine and I were talking about a book just today. Let's see, what was the title of that book? It was Nurture Shock. Talking about what's wrong with education and a lot of the experiences of our kids is that it's grounded in fluff. It's grounded in self-esteem kinds of concerns rather than in building efficacy. What you'll notice with the factors that affect self-efficacy is that it is very much grounded in things that make sense. So let's start with the mastery experience. With each success that you have doing something, you build self-efficacy. So a teacher's job is to help students be successful. to give them the tools that they need in order to achieve. Hard work. When someone feels that payoff, when they're doing an activity for the first time, they see improvement in their performance, no matter what it is. When you can see the improvement, it gives you a much stronger sense that you can actually do the behavior. So you get past those first 2 weeks of dieting, and your pants start to feel a little bit looser. That gives you a positive affirmation that you're doing the right thing, and that you can actually do it. So it's not just that you have the tools in front of you, it's that you have the tangible experience of doing the behavior and doing it well. So that's one of the factors that affects self-efficacy. A second factor that affects self-efficacy is modeling or vicarious experience. So maybe we haven't had the opportunity to get our hands on whatever it is, but we see others. We see others do it successfully. A lot of times when we are approaching a behavior that seems very difficult, let's say quitting smoking, that's something that for people, because it's an addiction, is incredibly difficult. A lot of times if we have the stories of people who have done it well or who have been successful in quitting smoking, it helps us. If we think about in a related sense, recovery from alcohol addiction. Going to AA, one of the reasons that you're matched up with a sponsor, someone who's also an alcoholic, is the modeling or the vicarious experience. Those are folks who have been sober for long enough that and are stable enough in their sobriety that they can be an example. The concept of leading by example is vicarious experience. So when we see others perform very challenging tasks and perform them well, we get the notion that we can do it too. So the factor affecting self-efficacy with vicarious experience says that even if we haven't yet had that experience, that mastery experience, we can still build self-efficacy by seeing good examples of it. And a lot of times, that's where we start. A third factor that can affect self-efficacy is what's called as social persuasion. Bottom line, being encouraged or discouraged. Is there a behavior that we're encouraged to take up? Did our parents sit down with us and help us study? In my folks' case, one of the things that I'm very appreciative of is that my folks read with me. And they said, hey, do what you want. You can, there's nothing that you can't do if you work hard enough. Obviously, when you're 5 and you want to have a nightclub where you're a singer, they're cautious with that. But as you actually do things, as you're good in school, as you're good in athletics, whatever it is, if you have people around you who are offering you the positive support, it's a lot easier to build the confidence or your belief in your ability to execute those actions well. That's why the good game. That's why having coaches who say good job to you is important. And likewise, if we're discouraged from exhibiting particular behaviors, we probably are going to be less sure that we can perform them effectively. If the first time that we do a math problem, someone looks at us and says, wow, that was what you did? You're going to suck at math. That's a very powerful form of social persuasion. So that definitely affects our ability to look at a task and say, hey, I can do this. So social persuasion is another factor. The final factor that I want to talk about are the psychological factors. So these are the perceptions of or negative feelings before performing a behavior. Think about it this way. We can talk ourselves out of stuff. I have seen people get up to give speeches and they psych themselves out. They think about all the things that could go wrong with what they're doing instead of all the things that can go right. This is what I'm talking about with the psychological factors. It is the story that we tell ourselves. If we focus on the negative, if we focus on how nervous we are instead of focusing on whatever it is that we're actually trying to do, we're probably going to make some mistakes. And because of the mastery experience, the more negative our experience is, the more we reinforce that self-fulfilling prophecy, the harder it is to overcome. So one of the critical factors in affecting people's self-efficacy is getting them to tell the right story to themselves. If they're nervous, to focus on the preparation process so that they can be confident in their execution. They can believe in their ability to execute a particular behavior. So the psychological factors can't be underestimated by any means. So, if we look at self-efficacy, our belief in our ability to perform a specific action in a specific context. Can we complete this class? That's what self-efficacy is. On the other hand, response efficacy is asking whether if we complete the task, it's going to matter. If you graduate with your master's, what does it matter? One of the questions, as you noticed on our introductions, is asking why you're in this program. In part because I like to help keep reminding people of what it is that they think they're going to get when they get out of here. It's a motivator. It's a reason why even when, you're cursing my name, why it's a good thing to be in a master's program, to be in a bachelor's program, to be taking a class, no matter what level it is to try and ask yourselves what it is that you want to get out of this program. That's an example of response efficacy. If you can answer that graduating with your bachelor's, graduating with your master's is something that's actually going to get you towards your life goals, then you're going to keep doing it. So response efficacy is our prediction of our likely outcomes. If we work hard, if we run every day, are we going to win the Olympics? We can work hard and run every day and be confident in our ability to do that, but if we don't see much of a point to it, not that winning the Olympics is the only goal there, but if we don't see much of a point to it, we're probably not going to do it. So at its heart, response efficacy is about asking the question, will a behavior have a desirable effect? One of the things that kept my dad from trying to quit smoking for about 40 years, 40 that is, was that he thought, I've already been smoking for a long time. I've probably already hurt myself. So even if I go through the pain, struggle, and nuisance of quitting, I've already polluted my lungs, my arteries, whatever it might be. This was actually what he would say when he would talk about why it was that he wasn't willing to try quitting smoking. He didn't feel like there would be a desirable effect, even if he believed that he could. So if you think about the ways that response efficacy and self-efficacy work together, it's really about our prediction of likely outcomes. Will the behavior matter enough to make a difference? So one of the core problems with voting behaviors is that a lot of times, and whether or not people vote, the United States, we have a terrible voter turnout. And a lot of times when you poll people, it's because they don't think that their vote matters. So what do you do to try and change that? You try and change the response efficacy. Try to make them believe that every vote matters. That if they're doing it, if they're getting out, if they're voting, they're a part of the process. So response efficacy is not only, will it matter at a very large level, have a desirable effect, but will it have enough of a positive, desirable effect to make a difference? That's the core challenge with efficacy. It's not just that we have a belief in our ability to do the behavior, but the behavior itself is going to result in something useful. So let's take a look at an example of the theory of planned behavior, taking kind of everything into consideration. So, kind of a simple example, getting out of bed at a decent time, or getting to bed, out of bed too for that matter. Getting enough sleep. This is something that we know we should do. So we know our attitude, we know that getting enough sleep is good for us. There's a positive attitude affect. So we probably have, that adds to our intention to be in bed at decent hours of the day. A lot of times when we're having health issues, one of the questions that our doctors will ask, the subjective norm, is that our doctor will recommend X amount of hours of sleep. Now, as you get older, you need less sleep. People who are traditional college age, 18 to 21, that's actually when you need the most sleep that you need in your life, is from 18 to 21. You actually need, research varies, but between 8.5 and 9.5 hours. Yet this is also a time in our lives when we don't tend to get that much sleep. So what does how much sleep should we be getting? That's a subjective norm. We're looking to someone outside and we're deciding whether we care what they say or not. But the challenge here, the perceived control, is that it may be hard to get to bed at 11. I have other stuff to do. If I go to bed, I can't get to sleep. Hey, I'm used to less sleep. So, that perceived control that even if we do it, we're not going to get enough sleep. Or, I have other things to do. That affects our confidence in our ability to do the action. So it can affect our intention to be in bed by 11 each night during the week. And it can actually directly interfere with the relationship between our intention and our behavior. So, let's say I go to bed at 11. And I sit there thinking about the fact, or lay there thinking about the fact, that I need to get to sleep. This is not a recipe for getting to sleep, as you all know. So, then I have my alarm set for 7 a.m. I know I need to be up. I don't have to be anywhere because, I'm a college professor. So I don't have to be anywhere. So then I move my alarm clock back. Suddenly it's 12:30 at night. So I move my alarm clock back to 8:30. Maybe I can't. Maybe I actually have to get out of bed. So then I do with less sleep. I fulfill that self-fulfilling prophecy that, hey, I can deal with less sleep. There's 1,000 variations as to where this can run amok. Even though the attitude and the subjective norm are there, we know we should, we have every intention. It's that perceived control. It's the voice in our head, the little angel or devil on our shoulder, if you will, that's interfering not only with our actual intention of being to bed, but the behaviors that we would need to support that. So this is why I say, when you have the opportunity to focus on attitudes and subjective norms, you use the theory of reasoned action. But when there's something there, the perceived control, a problem of efficacy, either self-efficacy or the response efficacy, then you should really think about the theory of planned behavior. Because that's where your campaign is probably going to target, is the perceived control component. If the problem is about the subjective norm or the attitude, you'd probably go with the theory of reasoned action. Alright, that's all for now, folks. Have a good one.